was wonderful to meet so many of you last night from different countries. And as Eric here stated earlier, takes many years if you really want to change the world. However, the great Rumi said, when I was young, I wanted to change the world. When I was old, I wanted to change myself. This is my journey. I started health optimization medicine and practice in 2009. And we are now 2023. So it's been a long journey with a lot of resistance from illness medicine. The field where I came from, bastards in interventional neuroradiology. I'm kidding. I was one of them who saw the world as just, I'll insert a tube in a scalpel and I'll cut you with a scalpel. But it is a good thing I was also trained in pharmacology, so I could kill you with my drugs. One of the things that you can find very annoying with illness medicine is that we come in a very poor lover with a lot of baggage. So when you go and see patients, we have a lot of preconceived notions of how health should be without really knowing what health is, right? We have if you ask any doctor here, Dr. Kim, what's the definition of health? I taught you. That's not fair. But anyway, no one here really has a great definition of health. Health optimization medicine, the first and only multi-omics clinical specialty that defines and delivers the standard of care and disease. So we all have standards of care in health, in disease, right? So if you get sued, you say, do you perform the standard of care in disease? And it's actually quite interesting that we have not developed any standards of care in health. And it's all about what's driving health in our country and in our economy, and how do we pay for it, rather than what's really good for the patient or the client, because the client is the one with the problem. Economies have problems too, but that's for another discussion. Anyway, I founded both organizations. I started health optimization medicine and practice with my own money in 2009. And then I started Prescriptions, which is now an LLC held by Smarter Not Harder. I used to joke around that Smarter Not Harder, we're not a condom company, right? But it's a reciprocity model because it takes a while for you to balance your nutrients, hormones, etc., or your metabolites inside your cells, about 3, 6, 9 months before you get any movement, right? So what I tell patients, it took you 40 years to get here. Why do you expect something to happen overnight, right? But we have to address things that are immediate, just like pain, anxiousness, sleeplessness, all those things that essentially your clients or patients are complaining about. And of course, those are the drivers for the products for Smarter Not Harder prescriptions. And this time around, it's Prescriptions as actually the major donor, so it's not coming out of my pocket anymore. So after this lecture, this is CME requirement. This is the 3373 lecture. Some of you may have seen this from the Stanford lecture that I gave. There's 3 scales of evolutionary perspective, 3 principles that require a shift in frame of reference, a mental framework of the 7 pillars of HOMeHOPe, and the 3 elements of HOMeHOPe. It's actually very easy. Just relax. The first 3 are, well, it's the x-axis is the evolution adaptation scale. Now, HOMeHOPE is a very evolutionary perspective, right? From when we began as single cells from the oceans and into where we are now, just with artificial light and working through all times of the day. Modern man is where we practice illness medicine, and the Paleolithic man and the single-celled organisms is where we practice home. And as I like to say, this is where we bring medicine home. And it's because agriculture and animal husbandry are the 2 watershed events that actually fucked up our lives. Change our lives. Because when you develop agriculture, you now had to stay in one place. We are built to be nomadic and move. We're no longer nomadic. When we started living together, then we have problems of sanitation, grain storage. And if you guys are interested, aspergillosis in wheat is one of the first things that would come up as an example of this. And of course, your sanitation, have your leptospirosis and other such gruesome diseases that you can get from rats and other such vermin. We like to bring back before agriculture and animal husbandry. And today we have Dr. Dom D'Agostino, of course, they are discussing one of the diets that's now available to us, which is a ketogenic diet. But we're looking at, our make and model is that of a Paleolithic man, right? We start with the base of a Paleolithic diet and adjust that for the needs of our clients. For the single-celled organisms, we look for the master regulatory genes and epigenetic pathways that control our genes. One of the oldest genes that we have is, of course, the vitamin D gene. We're about 250,000 years old as a species. The vitamin D gene is about 650 million years old, and that's how crucial it is to us. Here's illness medicine just to compare. Immediately they will compare vitamin D deficiency and say, okay, we'll associate it with disease immediately like diabetes. And even until now, we're still debating what's actually the right level. That's illness medicine for you, because it churns out grants, right? Am I being too cynical here? Health optimization doesn't do that to you, by the way. But anyway, in here, we take a look at the evolutionary reference points, right? The vitamin D levels in the Maasai and Hadzabe tribes of Africa are usually 50 and above, right? And they rarely suffer any chronic diseases. Now, so the second axis here, the y-axis, would be the size complexity scale, right? And you proceed here from organs all the way down to your cells and to your atoms and so forth. And you could diagram it this way. So organs are where illness medicine is practiced, and cellular biochemistry is where we practice health optimization medicine, right? And then I was asked last night by an Austrian by a Costa Rican by the way of Austria, where do we bring health optimization medicine in the future? If we have a way to detect and correct imbalances in your quantum biophysics, sure, we'll get there. But for now, metabolomics is the way that we can understand what the cell's doing. Organs are made up of specialized cells, and now we know that they're made up of basic cells that are made of nucleus, cytoplasm, mitochondria, etc. When I was in medical school, you could still see that science and technology was very organ-based. So we cannot blame illness medicine people for sticking there, because the first science and technologies that were available were made to investigate organs. But as science and technology progressed, we were left behind because this was never introduced to us anymore in medical school, that you can now take a look at what's going on inside the cell, and in fact, you could use it to detect imbalances inside the cell. So this is in illness medicine. Of course, if you would like to check the insulin levels, you check the indirect effect of insulin via your fasting blood glucose, right? But for illness medicine, we check the basic cell by using the science called clinical metabolomics. The test results look like this. It looks like basic biochem, right? It's just kindergarten biochemistry. And the basic cell is common to all of the specialized cells and all of the organs. So we deal with HOMeHOPe at the foundational level, which is the basic cell, which is the common denominator of health. Here, I usually always append this with the cell and its networks, right? Because a cell is never alone. Now, the z-axis, the third axis, is the environment chronobiology scale, right? The light bulb was invented in 1879, and in 1920, we had the radio, and we're still increasing in electromagnetic smog. And where we'd like to bring this back is before 1879, and how do we do that? We do that with techniques of electromagnetic remediation. There are now companies that do that. Right now, it's still expensive, but for my house, I actually did it myself, right? You could just clubber together, and you don't have to do it all at the same time. But as I like to say to my students, the only thing that a mentor could give you is, a good mentor anyway, could give you is perspective. The rest you can Google. So you can actually Google what is a good electromagnetic radiation remedy for your house or your office space. So where we practice illness medicine is right now. Where we'd like to bring it back is before the invention of phototoxicity. So anyway, illness medicine will again immediately associate EMF hypersensitivity with diabetes and MS, right? But in health optimization medicine, we actually are looking at how it stresses living cells. We don't go to disease right away because you don't get sick right away. Yeah, you can detect and correct the imbalances even before you get sick. So those are the first three. The next three will be the frame of reference shift in frame of reference in three principles. This shift in frame of reference, as I said, is very important because this is where most of the fights between illness medicine and other forms of medicine occur, right? So the first thing that we have to shift our reference to is pathogenesis, which is the cause of disease, right? Origin or cause of disease. And salutogenesis is the cause of health, right? You know that there are some medical systems in there that go to the root causes of disease. For example, we don't. We go to the root cause of health. And so you just find out later, there's really only one root cause of health. Now, When you take a look at pathogenesis, your starting point is a disease. You go to a doctor, you have a disease, right? And we're reactive, I treat disease. And when you don't have disease anymore, they say that you're healthy, but it's not. You just don't have the disease, but you're not healthy, right? So you just minimize the problem. In salutogenesis, the starting point is your health, right? Or potential for health. And then it's proactive, so you can generate better health, right? And this one has no endpoint. It has a progress point. That's why when you have patients or clients in HOMeHOPe, they become usually your lifelong friends unless you absolutely detest them. Anyway, people are laughing because they know that I spoke to this guy and he said, we really have not yet taken off in salutogenesis, and it's time for us to make a profession of health about health. The second shift in perspective here is from geriatrization to neotenization, right? And this is how we go from cute to uncute as we get older. Animals, they're puppies, and then we don't like them anymore. And Mickey Mouse, when he came out in 1928, was a rat, right? He had a long snout and then small eyes, etc. But he was juvenilized. They found out that people responded better to a baby face. It's a high forehead, receding chin, and a button nose, and his nose was pushed backward. We're not going to do this to you in health optimization medicine. We are going to do what's called metabolic neotenization. Neotenization is a process of making you younger, right? When we do this, we move your metabolite values to the levels of 21 to 30 years old because that's what's considered as the golden period for you to mate and reproduce, right? Or evolutionarily derived values like in the optimal range, such as those for vitamin D. Right? We do a couple of major techniques. It's ratio correction. You correct the ratios of various hormones, for example, testosterone estrogen ratio, or omega-3, omega-6 ratio, and network-wide range shifting. You cannot just shift a metabolite or one hormone, and that's because they're in a network. If you touch one, everything else. The clinically observed consequence here will be what's called epigenetic neotenization, telomeric neotenization, or the euthanizing of other clocks that determine biological age versus chronological age. Now, the last is probably a new term for some people here. It's organology to holobiontology. And holobionts are assemblages of different species that form ecological units. In other words, they're an ecosystem. This is to be distinguished from a superorganism. A superorganism just has a single set of DNA. Example is a slime mold, right? But phenotypically, they look different at each stage of the life cycle, right? A holobiont. So illness medicine deals with individuals in a population. You have an individual, population, community, ecosystem. Why does it do this? And why does statistics do this, right? It's because your antibiotics and your surgery has to work within a major portion of the population. But we are, at health optimization medicine, our ecosystem is the body itself. It's basically a set of cells that are all cooperating with each other. We are actually holobiont hackers here, right? Now, in the allopathic medicine model in medical school or in allied health schools, how do we shift the frame of reference from disease diagnosis to health detection? So in regular school, we have anatomy, physiology, and where they meet, where structure and function meet, and you cannot differentiate them anymore. Of course, you have molecular biology. Then you're taught pathology, right? What can go wrong? And then this is how you give drugs to what goes wrong, and here's how you cut it up if it goes wrong. Or, like I used to do, you can combine both, and a combination procedure, which of course you can charge more. So this one is we do the diagnosis and treatment of disease, right? So what's missing here is health optimization, right? Because we are taught how to change tires and how to diagnose your carburetor without even knowing how a car should run. You are not taught how this should run optimally. And that's what's missing in our education, in not only in medical schools, but in healthcare schools, right? So we do a detection and correction of imbalances at inter and intracellular network level. It's common to all organs, but here it's a disease at the organ level. That's why you go to your cardiologist, immunologist, and so on. The third part, see, we're fast here. The 7 multi-omic sciences that HOMeHOPe translates into clinical practice is the first one. So we'll introduce the 7 pillars of HOMeHOPE here. In illness medicine, clinical practice, we check for disease markers. For example, we take a look at your HbA1c or your FPS, right? And say, oh, okay, you're diabetic or you're pre-diabetic, right? And then we do disease management. But before that happens, we now have the science and technology check what happens to the cell before this actually happens, right? It turns out that time, genetics, symbiotic partners, and environment actually produce genetics, for example, nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, nucleic acids, symbiotic partners like your mitochondria. Mitochondria are endosymbionts, right? They're bacteria that live inside your cells. You got microbiota, as is the subject of the next few days. Your direct and indirect signals from your environment, like light, I mentioned phototoxicity earlier, and your evolutionary and circadian time, right? They all actually produce metabolites, right? That can then be detected and corrected as metabolic biomarkers, and for which you can do health optimization. So we can detect and correct now early onsets of metabolic deregulations. And if you want to do that, then that detection and correction, the first thing that you do is to apply the science of clinical metabolomics. Many of you here in the front actually have finished that module, all right? And if you want to influence nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and other nucleic acids, we're too old to be influenced by that. I was telling some people here last night that I bought a CRISPR-Cas9 lab with the hope of changing my genes. No, I'm kidding. But you can't do that anymore, and the science to deal with this now is epigenetics, right? And then if you want to influence your mitochondria and gut microbiota, you use the sciences of bioenergetics and the gut immune system. And if you want to change the direct and indirect signals from the environment, then use a science called exposomics, which is the sum total of all your exposures in the environment, right? And if you want to change the evolutionary and circadian time influences, then you use the sciences of evolutionary medicine and chronobiology. So these are the 7 pillars of health optimization medicine. Each of them has a module, and our students go through this to study them. Now, this is already old, right? And this is not 11, and they were saying already clinical metabolomics paves the way towards future healthcare strategies. You see how long it takes, right, to get to our clinics. And so why did I choose the metabolome, right? Metabolites are, you know what metabolites are, I don't have to explain that to you. But as you move away from the genome, right, you can see more of the environmental influence and physiological influence, right? A simple way to remember this is that you cannot find mercury toxicity in the genome, but you will find it in the metabolome, right? So why metabolomics? Because genomics can tell you what can happen. Transcriptomics can tell you what appears to be happening. Proteomics is what makes it happen. And the metabolites in metabolomics is what has happened and is happening. So that is what we would like to detect now, and that's available to you. So it's clinically available immediately. In the car dashboard analogy, now we have a home dashboard. What do we check for? We check for the metabolites in blood, urine, and stool. It's really very simple. You just have to know your biochemistry. Anyway, for those of you familiar, you know that there's a human genome database, right? We also maintain a global human metabolome database, right? There's toxins and environmental chemicals. There's one, the Asian MDB, or the Human Metabolome Database, is out of Canada and actually integrates all of this, the drug bank, the T3DB, and so on. And for the ladies here, until now, the fastest growing segment of the metabolome database are toxins from cosmetics. Take a look at the various ohms here. So micronutrient metabolome, you can look at a dashboard here, and this is like the kind of test result that you can get, and you could give to your clients the different detection of your various micronutrients, right? And then you could take a look at your macronutrient metabolome for your fats, for example. You can take a look at the fractions of your omega-3 fatty acids, your omega-6 fatty acids, and the ratio between your omega-3 and omega-6, which can give you an earlier detection of anything wrong with the heart of a patient earlier than a cardiologist. And then when that happens, you can either try to correct the ratio or you can refer the patient to the cardiologist. Now, there's also an epidemic of cardiologists actually prescribing too much omega-3 fatty acids, and they upset the omega-3 to 6 ratio. Everyone is saying, oh, okay, we lack omega-3s, but when you take a look at their metabolites, it's just too much omega-3. And so you're upsetting the balance. And this is because of prescription omega-3s. So you can check this now, right? And then carbohydrates, of course, you can take a look. X is for the anaerobic metabolism. And then the 0 here is for the citric acid cycle metabolism. And you can see now that the things that you memorized before about the Krebs cycle, you can actually measure them. I don't know whether or not you guys used my mnemonic here from citric acid, aconitic acid, isocitric. Can I keep selling sex for money, officer? But that's how this whole thing goes. So anyway, gut microbiome, metabolites, you have your short-chain fatty acids, of course. The butyrate here is one of the most important ones. And why is butyrate important? It's because it's a primary fuel of colonocytes. If you go to a gastrointestinal doctor and ask him the primary fuel of colonocytes and he says it's glucose, you should dump him. So anyway, in the epigenome, of course, this is my favorite slide for epigenetics. If you are a smoker, you affect essentially 3 generations, right? For your born child, your child's unborn child. And so here is how the experiences of previous generations can affect who we are. Famous one here, you can read about it, is Audrey Hepburn, right? The Dutch fan. Anyway, the epigenome, this is one of the tests. Epigenetic age would be, the current test results of epigenetic age here would be 34, right? The calendar age is 36. And here they're only testing for methylation, but there are other modes really of testing for the epigenome. It's just that the methylation is the one that's most rapidly testable. Then you do the exposome, and I said this is a sum total of exposure to things. Like, for example, in a mother who's been drinking during pregnancy, then that's an exposure to alcohol and contributing factor of fetal alcohol syndrome. So here you have mercury and cadmium, and I've had a lot of patients lately with mercury toxicity, and that's coming from the mercury from very meaty fish. In fact, I give them a wallet card that says which fish has the least mercury. And the other thing that I see, I also practice in Asia, and the other things I see in there is a rise in arsenic toxicity, and they're usually found in milled rice. Arsenic is found in milled rice. In fact, I had a couple, the wife had low arsenic and the husband had high arsenic, and the wife called me up and said, I am not poisoning my husband. The husband is a heavy rice eater, right? For chronobiome, right? And the chronobiome is a very new concept, right? They're just trying to identify what the chronobiome is. But for the acupuncturists here, you know that the organs actually function at different times of the day, et cetera, et cetera. It's nothing new for them, but for us who are looking for objective measures, right? So they're trying to find out what the chronobiome metabolites actually look like. And here's a pilot characterization of the human chronobiome, the time-dependent signals. So it means that when you draw something from the patient or client, it may not be there, and at another time it may be there. And this is where the chronobiology is currently going as a testable clinical science, right? And of course, sleep deprivation. For those of you who stayed up late last night talking politics, according to some people, sleep deprivation upregulates cytokines and C-reactive protein, and you could actually take a look at cytokine balance. Currently, cytokine tests are very expensive. Stanford rather, developed a test that of 6 cytokines pro, 6 cytokines anti, but it turned out to be quite a very expensive test. We'd actually like to see that come to clinics. Of course, in evolutionary medicine is the most important metabolome that we're looking at in health optimization medicine, which is a cell danger response metabolome, right? Evolutionary medicine asks, why do we get sick? And health optimization medicine asks, how do we get healthy? So what if you know why you get sick, if you don't get healthy, right? But we do need to know why do we get sick. For example, when you get an ankle sprain, you get swelling of the ankle, right? And you remove your weight from the ankle. And these are evolutionary mechanisms for you to decrease weight bearing on the ankle. The pain is actually for it to remind you not to mobilize the ankle, and the swelling is actually serves like a cast. So what do? We give the patient, we put the patient in a cast, we give them some acetaminophen, and we give them a cane so they could socialize, and there we fucked up their care. So here's the visual summary of HOMeHOPe balancing, and many of you have seen this, like oxidative stress. And in fact, not just oxidative stress, right? Reactive nitrogen species stress also do this, right? And they are associated with all of these diseases. And so if you take a look now, then really begin with something like redox balance, right? Redox signaling. And then you see here the balance between antioxidants, oxidants, mitochondrial homeostasis, and your metabolism and inflammation, right? And so there's a balance up there. And here's the wonderful yin-yang of that balance. Of course, your transcription factors, NF-kappa B and NRF2, they balance each other, right? But because the body knows how to heal itself, especially in acute phases, right? And its initial response really is a production of reactive oxygen species because it's providing energy to fight off your whatever it is that's stressing you out, like your deadbeat husband, for example. Sorry. Anyway, the key here is that these are all in a balance, and the NF-kappa B will produce pro-inflammatory cytokines, and then as that is done, your NRF2 will produce anti-inflammatory cytokines to balance it out. Now, the key here is that these two, we always ignore the NFR2 portion. Right? And one of the big NRF2 supplements that people take without knowing it's an NRF2 activator is actually turmeric or curcumin. And there's your pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines, and right there is your balance. So we're all about balance, right? So you could see here that the cell danger response actually has 4 major components. The first one is oxidative stress, which we took up here, and then inflammation, which is the amplification. Oxidative stress will be your trigger, right? Inflammation would be the amplifier for this by the production of your inflammatory cytokines. And then you have innate immunity, activation of your macrophages, for example. And then the endoreticular stress response. You guys know what this is, right? The UPR, unfolded protein response. That should be familiar to you because that was elucidated decades ago. Now, so here's the cell danger response, and it turns out evolutionarily, don't mind that the thing here is just I'm pointing out that there are only 8 ways evolutionarily that a cell responds to stress. Whatever cell it is, there are only 8 ways by which it responds to stress. Wouldn't it be great if we just knew how how any cell would respond to stress and how you could deal with it as a clinician, right? And this is where we'd like to go. We'd like to go by first principles. We would like to optimize the resolution of your cell danger response, whether or not it's acute or, more importantly, chronic stress, right? And chronic, doesn't only mean your inflammatory foods, etc. You can also have toxic people around you. But why are we discussing this? Is because metabolites are the primary drivers of the cell danger response, right? They are the primary drivers of the cell danger response. And in fact, here's how it looks like in the paper by Navio. You see here, we measure all of this, right? And there's the usual suspects, folate, vitamin D, adenosine, ornithine, histidine, blah, blah, blah. It goes on, right? And here it says healthy development, winter, maintenance metabolism. Remember, you have summer and winter every day in your system. When you're hungry, you are in a winter metabolism, and when you're postprandial, then you are in a summer metabolism. So you give your alpha lipoic acid decreases your blood sugar, right? So you give it postprandial, right? Here's the other part of that slide, tryptophan, lysine, et cetera, et cetera. So you're wondering, why do you need to measure all of that? Because they actually drive your cell danger response. Now, look at the last part here. You have your metals and heavy metals, and then your gut microbiome, right? Now, so illness medicine needs to learn metabolomics. As you can see here, this is a slide that I created for illness medicine doctors. It's called the stethoscope of the 21st century. But they are having challenges, right? And these are the specialties that they placed in the journal article: oncology, endocrinology, rheuma, neuro, spirology, gastroenterology, etc. Now, why are they having translational challenges of metabolomics? Because they're disease-oriented, right? You look for a pattern of disease. How can you look for a pattern of disease? You don't even know the pattern of health, right? That's fucked up. They're also used to looking for single disease markers instead of marker patterns. There's no one single marker pattern for health. As I said, it's a network. You have to consider them as a network. Now you have the last part of this, is the 3 elements that define and deliver the standard of care in health, not disease. We must think about this. We must deliver a standard of care in health, because it is incredibly infuriating that a patient would come to me with 3 different recommendations, one from his diabetologist, the other from his cardiologist, and the other from his neurologist, and say, these are the things you should do, you know? And these are combination of vitamins, minerals, lifestyle changes, etc. What the fuck? And my patients, doctor, what should I do? And I will not actually integrate those because I will take care of the basic cell first, right? I'll set those aside, take care of the basic cell. And from the test results, that's where we adjust both the metabolite levels and recommend lifestyle changes, right? Even your lifestyle changes are actually dictated by test results. Health, many of you have seen this, very simple takeaway. Health equals A plus B plus C is an optimal physiologic state characterized by the absence of disease and the maintenance of balance between anabolism and catabolism according to the life cycle of organism. But really, so what's the root cause of health? It's really the balance between anabolism and catabolism according to the cycle of life of an organism. And for those of you who know inflammation intimately, what is inflammation? Is it anabolic or catabolic? Oh, dear. Anyway, so it means that because you're not sick doesn't mean you're healthy. It only means you're not sick, right? Now, fitness is an optimal physiologic state that allows one to handle stress, physical, emotional, and mental, from a baseline state according to the life cycle of organism. And the key here is to ask the question, fit for what? Being physically, emotionally, mentally fit, ask the question, fit for what? And the way to remember this is corny thing like, you may be fit to run a marathon, but are not healthy, or may be healthy, but are not fit to run a marathon. That's a polite way of saying it. But if you remember the erectile dysfunction drugs that are being advertised on your television, it says, make sure you're fit for sexual activity. They don't say you're healthy for sex. Make sure you can do those acrobatics first before you take this. So anyway, HOMeHOPe does not use the illness medicine range of values because those values are just a cut-off values. They are survival values, right? They're not optimal values. So you can have patients or clients coming to you say, hey, but my thyroid is normal. Oh, but this is normal. That no, you're shifting it down to 21 to 30, and therefore you're not using that. And it's important to tell your patients or clients exactly. So Hertog actually defined this. He was my mentor in hormone balancing. He started that whole field, right? I trained with him in Paris, and he admitted to me that he pushed hormone values 25 years old plus minus 2, right? So you push it that way. And then, of course, we have, in the US, we have Mark Gordon. He says he uses a median value between age 20 to 30. And then there's, of course, me, who's going to be the renegade here. Use the 50th to 75th percentile at age 21 to 30. Or use evolutionarily derived values, for example, for vitamins, right? No, what we do is very simple. You measure the levels of metabolites, you compare them to optimal ranges or evolutionarily derived values, and you balance using network-wide range shifting and ratio correction. The order of use of balancing agents would be bioidenticals and bioactives, for example, hormones and nutrients, right? The second line would be your phytoceuticals, bacteria, phages, your probiotics. The third line would be synabiotics. And the reason for this is that your synabiotics, these are drugs, these have never been encountered by your body in evolutions. I don't know what the fuck to do with this, right? So the first thing that you should consider is what does the body actually use to defend itself, to heal itself, or to deal with some ongoing stress before you actually go deep with the harder drugs, as they say. Anyway, this is a modification of the slide of Aubrey de Grey, as he's a biogerontologist. And he says that this is a common view of aging, right? You have communicable diseases, congenital diseases, and then chronic diseases like Alzheimer's, cancer, atherosclerosis. And then there's aging. There's frailty, sarcopenia, immunosenescence. You know, I used to subscribe to this view, right? I used to describe older people with sarcopenia, etc., with frailty syndrome, right? But then the better way to look at it is this way. You move that vertical bar from aging away towards the diseases portion and divide it. There's specific diseases of aging like Alzheimer's, cancer, and atherosclerosis, and then general diseases of aging like frailty, sarcopenia, immunosenescence, etc. So that's the view that I subscribe to because you notice that all of these diseases actually happen when you're old. Now, aging in 3 words is metabolism, lifelong damage, and then you have pathology in late life. That's the model, right? And Aubrey de Grey has a maintenance approach. And this is where you guys ask me all the time of what my point of view is. It's a maintenance approach. We have your stem cells, your telomere control, your suicide genes, your mitochondrial mutations. You do have backup copies, and so on. Someone was asking me yesterday about V cells and its effect on mitochondria, for example. And this is part of the maintenance approach of that they're doing for aging. Our approach here is before this. Like, why do that when you're older? We do the health optimization approach, right? We take care of the metabolism so it inflicts minimal damage on the organism, or at least damage that is sustainable for a high quality life. You ask me what high quality life is. It is a life without pain. That has been defined a long time ago. And we, of course, are very artsy about it. Oh no, not just physical pain, but emotional pain and psychological pain and mental pain and spiritual pain. We have all of that stuff. So health optimization medicine and practice is the first and only multi-omics clinical specialty that defines and delivers the standard of care of health, disease, right? And in our online academy, I'm done teaching partially orally now, by oral transmission. We now have an online academy with clinical metabolomics, and we offer one of the highest CME credits around. It's actually, clinical metabolomics alone is actually for physicians good for 2 years. Chronobiology, clinical exposomics, epigenetics, evolutionary medicine, bioenergetics, and the gut immune system. And I was asked last night of what's going to be open to health optimization medicine in terms of how we practice it. I have written some code where you could actually just ask an AI system of what the deficiency is and what you can do about it. And it's Boomer actually said that we're going to get lazy, and said we can get lazy so we can spend more time with our patients. And then you could do that. And the other thing, of course, that's also in play would be taking a look at an automated analysis of the test results for a particular patient, and then putting the results out in your own voice, right? In the way you things. Those are already all possible now. I was telling Aaron last night, I wrote the code for dump in some reference books in there in Metabolomics, and I wrote the code in less than an hour. That's how fast things are moving. So this is what we probably will be offering our practitioners, in the next 1 to 2 years. Thank you very much. Remember that disease is managed and health is optimized. There's no such thing as health management. It's health optimization. Thank you.